Bienvenidos, Ushamdi, and welcome CTS-131 Section 875 students for the Spring 2018 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. This is the Cisco Networking Academy Routing and Switching Essentials version 6 course, or the Anne Arundel Community College Networking 2 course. And this morning's packet tracer, or actually I should say, this morning's lab tutorial and solution set is going to be on lab 2.3.3.4, where we're going to be doing a packet tracer from scratch and configuring a switch management address. And we're going to talk about some of the different ways that we can manage switches. So let's go ahead and jump into packet tracer. As you can see here, I'm running the latest and greatest version of packet tracer. This is also the version that you should be running, and it's 7.1.1.0138. A lot of bug fixes in this release from the 7.1 original release. So that's the version that we're going to be running here. All right, now I'm basically looking at the lab document. Now remember, this is a Word document, and I guess it does come in a PDF as well, but this is one of the activities that if you were taking this class in person in a classroom setting, you would probably end up doing as part of your lab work. So all we need here is a 2960 switch. So if I come down here, you can see in the bottom, I've got all these routers listed. Well, all I need to do in the bottom left, as you can see, if I mouse over routers, it says routers, Control-Alt-R, and then switches, Control-Alt-S. So let me do that. Let me do Control-Alt-S and see what we get. Yeah, the Mac, it does not like that. So, and that's okay. Let me try one more time. Control-Alt-S. There we go. All right. So we get the switches down here. If I said Control-Alt-R, it switches to routers. Control-Alt-S, it gives me the switches. So let's grab a 2960 switch. And it can be any old 2960 that we have here. And then we need a PC, and that's going to be PCA. So you can see in devices, I could say Control-Alt-V, so let's try that. Control-Alt-V, and there we go. And then we're just going to grab a generic PC, and I'm actually setting this up. It's going to look the same as it does on the diagram. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do on a Mac, I'm going to do Control-I, and I'm going to make these much bigger so that we can see exactly, exactly what it is we're doing. I want to bring them a little closer here. All right, and make them a little bigger. There we go. It's a little easier for us to see on the screen now. All right, so they're talking about a switched virtual interface, and let's see how they want us to proceed. All right, so cable the topology as shown. And again, very straightforward. I'll come down here, and the lightning bolt, and I wonder if it gives us, yeah, Control-Alt-O, so let's try that. Control-Alt-O, and there are the connections, and all I need is a straight through to go from the PC's fast Ethernet 01, and I'll drag that over here to the switches fast Ethernet 06. All right, so now we have the switch and the PC connected together. Now, you're probably wondering why that is orange. So remember, this has to do with the spanning tree protocol. Basically, the layer 2 feature to prevent loops, right? So it prevents loops at layer 2. In other words, with the MAC address information, we're going to be preventing loops. And so what was happening there, that 30 seconds we had to wait, is for that port to go from the down state to the listening state to the learning state, and then to transition to the forwarding state. And we'll be talking about spanning tree later on in this course, but for now, just realize that that's why that goes orange, but now it's green because we are now in the forwarding state. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to make sure we stay along here. So I am on part 1, and it says establish a console connection to the switch from PCA. Now, this is important because can I manage the switch right now? Could I SSH or Telnet or open a terminal window to manage that switch right now? And the answer is no, because there's no addressing information on the switch. In fact, let's pull the switch up and let's take a peek. And you can see one of the huge bug fixes in 7.1.1 is that the switch fonts actually respond now to being increased. So here I am on the switch. It's simply in user exec mode because of the greater than sign. If I type enable, this is going to transition me to privilege exec mode. If I say show IP interface brief, so this is just a 24 port switch, and we'll make it even a little bit larger here. And what are the IP addresses on this switch right now? Exactly. There are none, right? They're all unassigned. So I can't telnet to the switch, right? There's no IP address for me to telnet to. And all I have is an Ethernet connection, right? So I can't console in, so let's add in a console connection. And we still have the connections down here, and they make it, I like this, they make the console cable connection the same color as it would be if you had a physical console cable. So I'll come to PC0, and I'll change the name of that here shortly, and we'll go to RS232, and we'll drag that over to the switch console port, right? And typically you're going to find the console port on the back of the switch. And now we have a console connection over to the switch. Well, let's do some housekeeping here. So one of the things we want to make sure that we do is I'll go to the config, and we want the display name to be switch 1 because that's what it is right here, switch 1. That's what it is on our diagram. And PC0, the same thing. Let's pull PC0 up, and we're going to change the name in the config so that it displays PC, oops, sorry, we want caps, PC-A. All right. So everything looks good there. Let me adjust this. There we go. That looks a little nicer. All right, so there is our diagram, right? We've got our console connection to the switch. So we're going to configure some basic switch settings. Now, if I click on the switch, right, I've got access to the different settings here, and I think that they want us to establish a console connection to the switch from PCA. All right, so they don't want us to do this. They don't want us to come onto the switch and configure things, right? It's good to know how to do this from the PC. So we'll go to the desktop. Here's the terminal, right? And this could be PuTTY. It could be TerraTerm on your Windows box. It could be Secure CRT, which runs on Windows and Mac. So in whatever terminal emulation software that you're running. And again, the default that we want is 9600 for the baud, 8 data bits, no parity, 1 stop bit, and no flow control. So I'm going to say OK, and you can see here it puts me onto the switch, albeit the font is very, very small, so I'll MC this as we move through. And in fact, it's interesting, it gives us the privilege exec prompt right out of the gate. So we've already entered the enable command. How would I get, and here's a good question, how would I get back to privilege exec mode? I'm sorry, user exec mode. How would I transition to user exec? Would I say exit? Let's try that. Yeah, no, that exited me out, right, of my session. So I hit enter and I type EN for enable. How do I get from privilege exec back to user exec? You've got it. We type disable. So disable gets me back to user exec. Enable enables me to configure the switch, right? It gets me into privilege exec mode. So from here, let's go into configure terminal. We're going to put our host name on here as S1. They want us to enable secret, right? So enable secret, and the secret password is going to be class. We want no IP domain lookup. And remember the reason, whoops, and we're going to do domain lookup. The reason that we do the no IP domain lookup is if we mistype something, we don't want the switch to try to resolve the name as if it's a host name. And so by saying no IP domain lookup, if I were to type something like, like that and hit enter, well, actually do that and enter, it says unknown computer or computer name, right? Unable to find the computer address. So it's not going to go through the steps to try to do the translation, where it'll sit there and wait for the DNS server to respond. All right, now we also want a banner. Okay, so banner MOTD, and we've had some challenges with this in some previous labs. So if I do the %, and they've got the hash sign here like this, and you can certainly use that. So, but I always use the % because it's typically not a character that I'm using somewhere in the banner, and they just simply want it to say, and actually they want us to do this, so unauthorized access is strictly prohibited, period. And they want the delimiter at the very end. So now we've got our banner. If I say exit here, right, you don't type disable to get out of global config. You type exit to get out of global config. And there's a question here. It says, what shortcut keys are used to go directly from global config back into privilege exec? And this is a good question because I typically type exit to do that. Is it Control C? There you go. So Control C is a shortcut, keyboard shortcut, to get you from global config back into privilege exec. However, it's just always been easier for me to type exit, right? Because those keys are easier for me to hit. I don't like having to lift my hand up and do Control C on my left hand and hit Control and C to get into privilege exec from global config. So I'll just typically type exit super fast. All right, so and now we've got to enter the password in. All right, now we are back in, hold on, what are we doing here? Shortcut key, okay, good. Okay, so we are in privilege exec mode. The password doesn't show up on the screen, that's fine. Okay, so here's what we are going to do, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and do this from the switch, right? So we're in privilege exec because we've already shown how to connect via the terminal, and that's good, right? But I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here, and that the other font is very, very tiny when we're coming in through the terminal on the PC. So on the switch here, switch 1, and you can see the host name has changed, we're going to configure what's called a switched virtual or a switch virtual interface, an SVI. And these are used for a lot of things. One of the very common uses is as a management interface on the switch. And not just a management interface, but a remote management interface. Because in order to connect with the console cable like this, right, with the PC here and the switch here, these are going to have to be in pretty close proximity to each other, right? However, what if I don't have the console cable? What if I'm simply on my network and let's say that I'm, in one of my bedrooms, but the switch is in the garage? I don't want to have to get up and go to the switch every time I want to get onto it in order to make a configuration change. I want to be able to remotely manage the switch. And this is how you would achieve that. Is on the network that you're on, and it could be, whatever, 192.168.1.0, and I think that's, we're going to be using 192.168s, is you want to configure an IP address specifically for the switch virtual interface that matches the VLAN that the PC or your management stations are also in. Right? So how do we do that? Well, we pull the switch up, we go into global config with configured terminal, and then we get into the interface for VLAN 1. Now, remember, the V in SVI stands for virtual, and that's exactly what this is. This is not a physical interface anywhere on the switching device, right? So this interface, VLAN 1, is a software, and you can think of the S, and again, think of it as software virtual interface, even though it stands for switch virtual interface. Think of the S as like a software virtual interface. That's what we're creating, right? And so that's truly what it is. There is no port that I plug into that's labeled interface VLAN or SVI VLAN 1. It just simply exists in software. And so we're going to go ahead and say no shut. And then I'm going to say IP address, and we're going to use 192.168.1.2 and then 255.255.255.0. So a /24, and again, very straightforward, right? Nothing exotic here. Now, when I say do show IP interface brief, now take a look at the entry that we have along with all of the physical interfaces on the switch. We have the VLAN 1 interface on the switch. And again, by default, if I say do show run, and this is one of these things that it takes some time to get used to, if I was to tell you that all of these ports are in VLAN 1, you may respond with, well, hold on a second, I don't see switch port access VLAN 1, or even if it had switch port mode access, I don't see switch port access VLAN 1. So, okay, let's do this. Let's go ahead and go into global, we're in global config. We're going to go into interface range, fast Ethernet 01 to 24, and then gigabit Ethernet 01 to 2. So if I said switch port mode access, right, I turned every port into an access port, hard-coded it, and then said switch port access VLAN 1. Right? Because this is typically how we would prime or configure a port to which we're going to connect PCs, servers, access points, whatever the devices are. We would prime the port by saying it's an access port and then saying, oh, these ports are all going to be members of VLAN 1 or whatever VLAN they were going to be placed in. And so for our purposes, it's VLAN 1. So I'll say end, get back out to privilege exec. I'm going to save my config, and I'm going to say show run. Okay, so which of those two commands that I just entered are not appearing here in the running config? Exactly, the switch port access VLAN 1. And a lot of learners will become confused thinking, oh, well, wait a second. I know I entered that in. And so now they're like, oh, gosh, I got to go back in here and type in this interface range, FA01 to 24, gigabit Ethernet 01 to 2, and type in switch port access, whoops, and here I'll spell it all the way out, access VLAN 1, and hit enter. And then maybe now they say, well, let me say do show run. I'm not going to exit out until I know that this is set. Okay, well, where is it? Right? And so this is one of those sort of those Cisco quirks, right? Or those Cisco, behaviors where 99.9% of the time, and I'm going to reserve that 0.1 for something down the road, I'm sure, but 99.9% of the time with Cisco devices, if it's a default setting, it does not show up in the running config. And this is one of those cases. So how could I see if let's do this. I'll say exit, end. We'll get to privilege exec. So let's say I couldn't run show run for whatever the reason is. How could you see what VLAN that port would use as an access port? I could say show interface, fast Ethernet 06, which is the port the PC is plugged into, switch port, right? So we come over here and we take a look, and right here, access mode, VLAN 1, and what does it say right to the right of that? That's the default. So here's a location, and here's a command that can get us into a position to where we can confirm, oh, okay, right, access mode, VLAN, and 1 is the default. Because remember, if I'm in global config and I say interface fast Ethernet 01, and I say switch port access VLAN 99, right? So the VLAN didn't exist, it's creating it. But now when I say do show interface fast Ethernet 01 switch port, look at the access mode VLAN. And it does not say default because it's not. The default is VLAN 1. And we'll talk about as we move on in the course. For our purposes now, VLAN 1 serves us well, right? It's low-hanging fruit. Very easy to use, and it's the default. It's already there, right? It's already there. So we really don't need to do anything other than plug a whole bunch of devices into the switch, and they're going to be able to communicate with each other as long as they're on that same broadcast domain, that same subnet, that same VLAN. And they are by default because every VLAN or every port is assigned to VLAN 1 by default. So keep that in mind. And so now when I say do show run, take a look here, and there we go. And so this is also what leads to confusion is learners will see this and say, well, wait a second, 99 shows up, but why is 1 not showing up? Because then they think, oh, maybe VLAN 1's not configured. So maybe you do a do show VLAN brief, and you see, well, yeah, there's VLAN 1, and it shows that these are the ports that are assigned to VLAN 1. So why is it not showing up? And again, remember, it's because it's the default. So very important to cover that. Now we're going to restrict console access. So we're going to go into line con 0. And we're going to say password Cisco. So now when you connect via the console, you're going to get prompted, and I put the login keyword there, you're going to be prompted with the login prompt or the password prompt to log in, and you have to enter the password Cisco. Now, another important feature, and I hope it's on here, and it is. Another important feature to think about is this exec timeout, right? From a security perspective, let's say that every 9 minutes and 30 seconds, right, if there's no activity on the console line after 9 minutes and 30 seconds, it's going to shut the connection down. In fact, let me change this. Let's say we'll do 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if I pull the PC up right now, remember, you can see, here we are. I'm going to say end, and we're connected over here. So now I'm going to leave the PC window. In 90 seconds, a minute and 30 seconds, we're going to go back and check on that, check on the PC terminal connection, and it should be auto-magically logged out. So that's another set. I'm just going to throw that in there. Think about that, right? You would want to do that from a security perspective. And let's do the same thing on the VTY line. So we're going to go into global config, and this is something that's required here of the lab. We're going to say VTY, and I always do 0 through 15. It says 0 through 4, and that's fine, but I always do 0 through 15. So we're going to say password Cisco, and then log in, and then we're going to say exec timeout, and we'll do the same thing. 1 minute, not 1 minute, 1 minute and 30 seconds, sorry about that. So after 90 seconds of total time of no activity, if I'm SSH'd in or telnetted in, we're going to go ahead and I'm just reading ahead here. We're going to go ahead and get logged out auto-magically. All right, so it says configure an IP address on PCA, and that IP address is going to be 192, but let's see what happens. I think we're past our 90 seconds. Not yet. I think we're closing in here at 52:49. So we'll give it a couple seconds here and see if we get to that 90-second threshold to where what should happen if Packet Tracer cooperates is we should get logged out auto-magically here. And this session will end, and it'll take me right back to the login prompt on the console port where I'm now going to have to enter in the password. And I'm not sure if this is going to pick it up because we were already logged in via the console. And I think we're beyond 90 seconds. So let's do this. We'll go ahead and do the configuration work that's being asked of us here. I'm going to exit out. I'm going to exit all the way out, and we're going to log back in. So now we get this password prompt. I'm going to say Cisco. So here I am in user exec mode. So let's do this. I'm going to pull up, we'll do the IP, so 192.168.1.10. It gets our subnet mask correct. Default gateway, what's my value for the default gateway? Is it the SVI interface IP address? Now, down the road, it very well could be, right? It very well could be. But everything is in the same broadcast domain right now, so we don't need the default gateway. And when I say it could be down the road, if we were doing inter-VLAN routing with multiple VLANs, right? Hence the term inter-VLAN, right? If we had, let's say we had VLAN 99 and VLAN 5 and 10 and 20, and I was trying to route between the VLANs, then I would use as the default gateway the SVI address, because then the switch, which would be a multi-layer switch, would be behaving as if it was a router for me, and it would be doing routing between the VLANs. So we can leave that blank for right now. So let's go ahead and pull that back, and then let's get back into the activity here as we're wrapping up. All right, and they want us to test connectivity. All right, and between PCA and S1, switch management capability. And they do a show run, and I'm not sure why we've got the show run in there. Show IP interface brief, we did that. Okay, so now we're going to test connectivity. So on the PC, the command prompt, we're going to ping 192.168.1.2. And this is the SVI address. And did I put, yeah, okay, there we go. So, and that's the SVI address of the switch. So now you can see I can clearly ping the switch, right, without any issues. And now we are going to telnet, and this command is the craziest looking command I've ever seen. I thought it was just telnet 192.168.1.2. Yeah, there we go. So they show you this package manager command, and I think, and that's a Windows 7 thing. So again, this is if you're in class, you might have to type that command, but this in Packet Tracer, we just need to go straight in. And so we'll say Cisco and take a look. I'm on switch 1 right now, right? So in 90 seconds, that connection should go away. And they want us to, on switch 1, go into privilege exec mode with class, and then save the config. So remember, I can say copy running config, startup config, or I can simply say write memory, or WRIMEM, and that's all that's required. Now, the final question, the reflection question, why must you use a console connection to initially configure the switch? Why not connect the switch to the switch via telnet or SSH? And we kind of already touched on this. So remember, when I plug this Ethernet cable in, how many IP addresses did we see? And looks like we got logged out here. How many IP addresses did we see? Cisco, was it class? Sorry, I'm trying to remember here. Show IP interface brief. How many IP addresses were configured initially on the switch? None. So with no IP addresses, how could you connect? You can't. You couldn't connect remotely, right? You would have to be physically connected with a console cable. And this is typically what happens with switches, especially the switches we're talking about, like the 2960s or the 3560s, is that you would configure the switch first with a console cable connection and then put the switch in your environment so that you could get to it remotely. All right, so we basically went over the beginnings of establishing connectivity to a switch. In order to perform configuration work, we have to add the console cable first, right, so that we can get in there and do the configuration, and then this Ethernet cable that we've got configured, then that will work. All right, well, this is going to wrap up Lab 2.3.3.4 from the Routing and Switching Essentials version 6 course from Cisco Networking Academy, where we were configuring a switch management address. And remember, that switch management address is called an SVI. It is a switched virtual interface because it does not physically exist on the switch. It is a software virtual interface. But remember, SVI stands for Switch Virtual Interface. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Have a great weekend, and I will talk with you soon.